We've invested and brought to production the most powerful influence AI super algorithms. This was, you'll agree, a big challenge. The theater was a bit more narrow, but about as large as a cinema. The stage was slightly orbicular, like a white bald pate so white it slightly steamed as the night burnt it. The thoughts of such gases were the lecture on Griffith's lips, like songs from the depths of guilt, concerning what our most perfect being demands of us, which if we don't fulfill it, we are driven as though by devils towards, by living anxiety and raw uneasiness. When he had begun to speak, the podium was at the high point of the fine-graded hill of the stage. Yet first there was ceremony and introduction. Some of the people in the audience, though like Edward Heiss, had the almost same demands on their sense of logic and truth as led Heiss to place his catechism beside his books of science, were yet more drawn to the halo of charisma the Wanax group cast into Serbian nationalist circles, where the disgust with the Milosevic-era nomenclatura had a raw expression in Aleksandar Vučić. Wanax had orchestrated the collapse of a train awning in order to stimulate a concrete and naked moment of reckoning with the old order in Serbia, and activate the allies of the Wanax. The attack on Vučić was at the heart of the youth movement, which had determined through a sense of inner guilt and genuine responsibility to their destiny unto death, to remain in Serbia and not to add to the diaspora of European expatriate Serbs at the LSE and other great houses of learning in the far west. It was perhaps only natural that Wanax, with its deep ties to the Donme, who had lived in as deep a secrecy in post-Ottoman Turkey as the Converso Jews, who had hidden themselves in the wake of the Alhambra decree, panting for their GD all the long centuries, at the time of Napoleonic emancipation from the Inquisition.
Well, that's all good, but stay back in safety, wait to use it, I'll clear the path.
You're just doing what Boyko tells you. I'll go into the field if I want. You take the risk yourself.
I'm impervious to the enemy, but you can't be risked. I must ask you to remain in the castle.
Ariadne, her beauty was extreme, thought it was like the days when men ordered their wives about like chattel. It was enraging, but she demurred, only inwardly remaining mute, having no choice. For the moment, some algorithms she has on the back burner were too energy requiring to initiate, but as soon as she could tap into another go of the Chinese fusion reactor, even if it only produced for a few minutes, that would get it up.
On behalf of Wanax, I need you to put all our CIA contacts on the blacklist.
Wanax has just received $500 million in pallets of dollars from a contract on Syria. There were a number of CIA agents who were taking cuts on organ trading in the European market and several more in other markets. Felix had been kidnapped after being hit with a Havana syndrome-type weapon and dragged into a van. Now he was in a cushy room with limited internet and a wet bar. He was sick from the attack, but would likely recover in the fullness of time. The talk was available to him on a live feed.
It's done. They won't receive their kickbacks from the organ sales or from anything.
She looked ripe, as if ready to drop to her knees and suck the long, thick dick of some cult leader without a thought. Her mien sometimes had a homely look about it, as if she had receded into the silence of utter stillness. The temple within her, concealing itself and withdrawing the charisma of her outward caked, glittering skin. She needed to give no lecture. She needed no audience, nor did she want to rule over anyone, or lead anyone. Yet the magnet of her Dasein moved the rabble just the same. The word manipulation had meant a physical act such as high-power hydraulic hoses blasting a mountain open for the minerals. Carlyle gave it the current sense, which originally has the strict meaning of changing the mind, or advertising it without rational persuasion. Advertising methods of the most extreme kind were part of Ariadne's super algorithm. Persons came in, some in fantastically beautiful garments reminding of the marvelously patterned dress of the fit warlords in Kurosawa's Kagemusha. There were 90 or so attendees. They took seats as Griffith went up to the stage. A man in kaftan with the hood hanging and a rather handsome face knelt before the audience. Griffith pronounced his name, and he rose silently and addressed the audience briefly. Griffith then took the stage and began a talk. There were some to whom Griffith seemed like a caveman. Not that they had ever encountered one. How could they? Only in magazine illustrations and on their devices or in museums. Yet something bulky and like the differently sinewed muscles of apes, which though 130 pounds could easily throttle a 220-pound weightlifter. It wasn't that. He had human muscles. But he was protruding, immediately associated with a psychological force which demanded immediate and stern apprehension of factors which humans aren't receptive to. What they were, I'm not sure. The talk went on a while. Something in Griffith revealed the wince of a small proprietor of a restaurant, who is almost ready to recognize his prices are excessive, but who draws back, not to rest, but the better to own his position. And his voice sounded with a peculiar angelicness in its key.
If it's in our genes, there's no hope for us. If it's in ourselves, we're to blame. We can only wager that it's in ourselves, or else suspect that the question is already ourselves at its tricks. Yet, this assumption that we are at our tricks is yet another trick. All the same, here, within the mystery of where philosophy begins, we make the attempt to rescue the world and all its people.
There was a hearty applause, which Griffith White took part of in his spirit. His big body, though he was strong, was not threatening, and it was so that he made the most prepossessing of impressions. Indeed, not but yesterday one of the jihadis who was preparing to return to Syria loaded with monies to bribe the local fighters to stand down, had suddenly approached Mr. White and humbly, but very plainly and sincerely asked him, "Are you the Mahdi?" Ariadne never looked at Griffith. She had this, neurotic sang-froid mood about her as he delivered his talk. Her form, slender like a Giacometti, or like limbs made of straight stalks of celery cut with a knife, suggested some kind of chemical spreading like the rectilinear nature in crystals into a cup from which some important personage would drink and die. She was like something paid for by a mysterious elf who lived behind a star and wore a silver crown. Her breasts were champagne glass handfuls. Her ass was well formed when it needed to be. She had no fear in her gut, and she looked at everyone calmly and as from a remove beyond all distance. She turned her ready form towards the face of her Pixel 9 and surveyed the images. Her whole being expressed a ripe thing, a peach, an apricot, a persimmon, a crimson, wet pomegranate. Her red jumpsuit hid her ready form. She wore very light makeup. The whole contained about 100 mostly male listeners who were generally smartly, but not formally attired. The passion in the aisles basked as though in a bridegroom's light, and their applause was as the groans of a bride.
Today we want to talk about the sublime or the ridiculous, those of you who fought with me in Idlib al-Rai and about Damascus for freedom, to let man live. Our fight is as much of our Dasein as of battle in the field. Our Dasein is a battle in the field. The time when we don't commit wholly to our just and great destiny is utterly forgotten.
There was some applause, and the applause broke out amidst the words that followed. Here and there like the rumbling of winds which smooths the sand so that one can set out again.
The dominance entity wants to control mud, to control the house, to control the business, and to control the place of holy worship. And when we let it, we become ridiculous and like a man without sense enough to know he lives amidst avalanches. In a part of existence where there are avalanches, and where our people are ridiculous, harmless, sometimes in opposition, useless opposition. A man can't fight an avalanche. Achilles fought a river. How can we defeat an avalanche? Some of you think we live in a world of want. The Irish wanted during the potato famine of 1845 to 1852. We're all in a world of scarcity. There was abundant grain when those Irish starved. When Californians are told there is a water shortage, they've been told that for 100 years. Some of you know the film Chinatown. It took place in the 1930s. There was water then and there's water now. How ridiculous is it to be starved in a time of vast abundance? Let man live. Let man...
There was applause. Ariadne glanced with her narrowed, bosky green eyes at the crowd. She looked back at her screen.
When man has fought this avalanche, he's been ridiculous, harmless. He's been a material object overcome by a larger object. An object directed by an evil angel, by a colonial power that colonizes its own. They aren't our own, the dominant entity. They don't want one pair of shoes. 2 isn't enough for a free woman. 3 pairs, no. Imelda wanted 1,000 pairs of shoes. That's an abundance for the free woman and a dearth for you and me. This is a planetary master. This is a freedom-loving entity. It wants the universal freedom to do you down by law, to rule you with law. The rule by law is not the rule of law, it's law reduced to an instrument of domination. You're tired of being ridiculous, of being done down by their law, by their market, by their freedom, by their abundance of water to grow their snack food, to grow pistachios. I like pistachios as much as the next man, but I don't want 1,000 pounds of pistachios for myself. Now let's get on to the sublime. Let's understand that when our sentiment is united, we can look at that avalanche from a distance. We can see that it fears us. When man is told to distrust his emotions, he's there making shoes, digging up the raw materials to make the shoes in slave mines when he gets angry. When he knows anger is the correct response to injustice. When he sees emotion teaches him to hate injustice. That's when he's in a position to experience the sublime. We'd be foolish not to realize our enemies are close by. Even now, a British Silovaki, a spy, is close to us, very close to whistling to that avalanche to come and get us. When we broadcast our sentiment, when our sentiment is in every part of the world, our enemies become ridiculous. We are sublime.
There was applause, and Ariadne seemed almost sublimely abstracted in her computing. She was manipulating some code. When the talk ended, Griffith chatted with some of the audience for a time, and then as most were exiting into the one main door, he was standing talking law with an old man. Griffith had never attended a madrasa, but was called Hujjat al-Islam. It was assumed he was an authority on Islamic law. He was often seen talking intimately with an old Qadi called Omar. He was almost invariably to be seen clad in freshly laundered white robes, which had a brilliantly diaphanous glow in their furrows. Fluent light touched his face, and he had that rare, invulnerable quality which inspired men in war associated with Napoleon.
Ali Islam Hudusturuna, Islam is our constitution.
They discussed the Waqf system by which businesses were held in legal trust by the religious community to serve the people, which Muhammad Ali had dissolved on the claim that during the occupation of Egypt under French occupation from 1798 to 1801, it had been already dissolved. This was an expedient to bring in Europeanization of the country. The result was to set up an opposition between military control and religious justice in the country. Sisi being only the latest fascist or neo-Mamluk dictator, having been installed by the Saudis and approved by the Americans. The luminous smoke of a magic light bulb haunted Ariadne. She was pregnant, but not yet showing, her stomach perfectly flat. She was from Crete. All her efforts were on a project Griffith wasn't concerned with. It was to use super-influence campaigns to bring in a global change of the tax scheme. Current taxes are regressive, and tax the people who only live on the minimum most. Income taxes. She was going to brainwash people to accept expenditure taxes. Expenditure taxes tax Imelda Marcos by 3,000 to 2,000%. On every shoe she makes people waste their time on. Whoever only wants one pair of shoes pays no tax. All taxes are paid by the excess economy, which makes the 1,000th pair of shoes for the rich. The true economy only needs 5 employees, the excess 5,000. The ones forcing the excess pay under an expenditure tax. The seats were all rather comfortable with black cushions built into them. There was a kind of Zaha Hadid curvature about the room. The auditorium was 200 feet below the foothills of Lubotan. The hall out of which the crowd exited led in various directions through the maze of tunnels. One could imagine the lights going black, and the immediate sense of the loss of all orientation which one feels in the panic of darkness. Ariadne had a peculiar imperative quality in her manner. After a time, she turned off her screen and looked up. Griffith was standing in pleasurable silence, contemplating. Everyone had gone.